are the most important players in college football this year? Important doesn't always mean they're the best, although a lot of these guys are really good. Most important meaning their impact will reverberate throughout their team, and in many cases throughout the rest of the conference. You may win your conference, for example, because one of these guys fails to come through. So this is a prediction on how good they're going to be. It's just that however good they are, it's going to have a big impact, maybe extending beyond just their team. Obviously, a lot of quarterbacks here. I could name a million quarterbacks. I'm going to save you time and not even mention the obvious like Bryce Young, but I am going to go with some guys who have been on the move. You know, Quinn Ewers, for example, at Texas is obviously there. Caleb Williams at USC is obviously there. DJ Uiagalelei has not transferred, but he's obviously there too. And I think about those three guys because those three, whether it be at Texas, a favorite in the Big 12, whether it be at USC, a co-favorite in the Pac-12, or whether it be at Clemson, a favorite in the ACC, think about what I said. If they perform at an all-conference level, their teams are probably winning the conference, but the reason why a Wake Forest fan cares about what DJ does this year, the reason why a Utah fan cares about what Caleb Williams does is pretty obvious, but if it's not obvious, you look at those guys, the ones who have elite potential, and you realize there's a certain level that that guy can play at that may make what we do a moot point. So, you need him to struggle. Not all of us love rooting for someone to struggle, but you may need him to struggle. At the very least, it certainly helps. And on a side note, you hope to be the reason they struggle. But looking beyond just those three now, at the quarterback position, I'm interested in a guy like Devin Leary at NC State. That's a guy who's not going to be on the cover of every national preview magazine, but think about the pressure on some of these guys, and think about what Devin Leary has. He's a returning quarterback, and he's got a lot of his returning perimeter skill around him. He's got a good offensive line, but what else does he have at NC State? He's got a phenomenal defense. And they were injured at times last year, so certainly if they're healthy this year, they stand to be even better statistically. But what does that mean? It means he doesn't have to shoulder this ridiculous load. No one's looking at him and saying, well, there are only shots for him to throw for 450 yards every game. Devin Leary is the kind of guy that can afford to have good, solid performances and put his team in position potentially to win every game. They'll have a shot to win every game if he plays that way. The big question with NC State, and it goes right to the quarterback position, is going to be what's the difference between good and great? We saw them be good last year. Devin Leary taking the next step in his productivity, decision-making, etc. That's the difference between them being good and great. What about Hendon Hooker? They're in Knoxville. Yet last year, we've talked many times about that 34-3 touchdown to interception ratio, and that's wonderful. Sometimes when we get into what casuals would call the off-season, you start to look at stats in totality, and you don't really remember how they were amassed. And a Tennessee fan knows exactly what I'm about to say. Last year, Tennessee came out, boom, firing, first quarters of games, but then some of their productivity leveled off throughout games. Well, the name of the game is consistency there this year. They certainly want to perform at a high level. They want to put up those big numbers, but what they want to do is not get to the end of the first quarter, have the scoreboard say 17-3 Tennessee, then they're done scoring. So they want to be more consistent, and that's the next step in the evolution of Hendon Hooker as a quarterback in year 2 under Josh Heupel. It's not, he may have, for all I know, he may have a worse touchdown to INT ratio, but they may be better offensively this year. But when you look around and you understand they were 7-6 last year, for Alabama, that would be bad. For Tennessee last year, that was very good relative to what the preseason over-under win total was on them. I think it's going to end up being a good thing for a guy like Hendon Hooker that they ended up losing the game to Ole Miss and Pitt. Because think about how high the expectation would be nationally for Tennessee this year if they won 9 a season ago. They'd be the same team. Lose a close game, win a close game. They'd be the same team. But nationally, people will be talking about them being a dark horse SEC championship contender. And the fact is, you are what you are. But I think it helps them that they're still a little bit off the national radar. Tyler Van Dyke at Miami, this is a huge impact guy because a lot of folks are in different camps on what to expect from him, but that's the definition of an impact guy. You could find someone out there who would tell you, Tyler Van Dyke, I don't like him, I think he's going to be a bust. You could find other people who say, he's got NFL potential. And he's certainly being slept on because Miami as a program maybe slept on this year. Well, that's impact. Because everybody in the ACC looks around and they realize right now there are no dominant quarterbacks in the conference. If there was, there would be a dominant team this year. There is not a perceived dominant team. Clemson is that. They are the odds-on favorite to win the conference. You don't know. what DJ Uiagalelei is going to be. You don't know if maybe Cade Klubnik's got to be starting quarterback for him. So at Miami, think about what Tyler Van Dyke can be. If he's good, if he fulfills on the immense potential he has, Miami's a contender. But if he's not, then what does that do to clear the way for an NC State or a Wake Forest or a Pitt? We have no clue what that means. That's the definition of an impact guy. At Arkansas, KJ Jefferson fits this same description. KJ Jefferson, I don't know if a lot of folks realize this. He is the first returning starter at quarterback that Kendall Briles has had. Think about that. Kendall Briles, this is a name you're familiar with, been at multiple stops now, but as an offensive coordinator, it's the first returning quarterback he's had. That may mean a lot this year, it may not. They were the leading rushing team in the conference last year. He had contributed to that, he being KJ Jefferson, obviously, but I think a lot of folks are aware that Treylon Burks goes off to the NFL and they know, oh, they got that kid. What's his name from Oklahoma? Well, Jayden Hazelwood is his name. And Jayden Hazelwood is a guy who, along with some of the other complementary pieces they have there, I am very much looking forward to, because that's a guy who could stand a good shot of amplifying his name on the national stage this year. We weren't talking nationally about Treylon Burks going into last year. You were by season's end, weren't you? So you still got the guy who threw him the rock there in KJ Jefferson. I'm looking very, very, very much forward to seeing what that offense is in general. Now let's go away from the quarterback position for just a second. Bijan Robinson, massive impact guy, running back at Texas. A lot of folks have him rated as the number 1 overall pro prospect at his position, but consistency is the key word with Texas too. If I were to tell you they're going to have a rock-solid presence at running back, Bijan Robinson's going to stay healthy, he's going to produce all year, you would know, boy, that means so much for Quinn Ewers. Boy, that means so much for the Texas offense. And it probably means a lot for their defense, too, because you have a lot more consistency. If you have a solid run game, then you know coming in each given week, I don't know what my completion percentage is going to be today, but this dude carrying the mail back here, I can dependably rely on him. He's going to be there every week. It's just, I know quarterback's the most important position. If that guy, Bijan Robinson, plays up to his potential, the rest of the offense, it seems to revolve around that. Likewise, we go over on the defensive side. At Alabama, they're talking a lot about Will Anderson. I lead that fan club. But Dallas Turner, I hope you've already learned the name. If you haven't, you need to get ready. Dallas Turner, I think, is the second best linebacker in America. I think they have the top 2 linebackers in the country. I think Alabama has the first linebacker in Will Anderson. I think the second best one is right there across from him in Dallas Turner. I had someone tell me last year, who would know, that they had scouted 15 in Crimson there as being a better player than Aiden Hutchinson, who just went top 5 in the draft and was an All-American Heisman finalist for Michigan. Dallas Turner was a freshman last year. He is going to be a nightmare to deal with, and the reason a lot of folks are looking forward to watching this Bama defense and think it may be generational is because you got Will Anderson, who I think is the best player in college football. You got Dallas Turner, who looks like a space alien across from him. Chris Braswell is also there, former 5-star guy out of the DMV area, I believe. All 3 of them would be the best pass rusher pretty much in any other conference. They're all 3 on the same team. So, yeah, Dallas Turner this year is going to be a force. He was last year. It happened a little bit later in the season, and a lot of the spotlight was on Will Anderson. If Dallas Turner is remotely what I think he's capable of, they will set all kinds of records in terms of total sacks. We have actually a question about that later in the show. Last guy I wanted to hit here, Parker Washington, wide receiver at Penn State. He has such an opportunity this year. Jahan Dodson last year, he was what he was, a very, very talented player. Wish that you didn't see Sean Clifford go down to injury. Really would love to see what he could have been wire to wire if they just had their full offensive stable. But Mitchell Tensley is a transfer that's coming in there, I think, from Western Kentucky. And why it's so important and why this is so impactful, Parker Washington being their wide receiver 1 is so important because everything else, like for instance Tensley transferring in, all those other tumblers can fall into place if that number 1 tumbler can fall into place. And Parker Washington is a guy who stands to, I think, pop on at least the regional, if not national scale this year too. He's going to get a lot of opportunities. His season stats last year, he had 820 receiving yards on 64 receptions. He could significantly improve on those numbers being the guy. Those are just some of the important players this year. That's not exhaustive. We could do 15 of those segments too, and we've got time.